What if the people who claim to love you the most needed to see you dead to finally care? What if your absence meant more to them than your presence ever did? My name doesn't matter. What matters is that I walked into my parents' house and saw my own funeral. They called it a lesson. I call it the moment I stopped believing in family. It started like any other quiet morning, but there was a heaviness in the air, a strange stillness that made the world feel unreal, as if the sky itself was holding its breath. I had driven 6 hours to see my parents after months of silence. Silence born from arguments that were less about words and more about the spaces between them. Those invisible fractures that grow when people stop listening but keep pretending they care. I told myself I just wanted closure, maybe peace, maybe forgiveness. But what I really wanted was proof that they still saw me as something more than a disappointment. The irony, of course, is that I found that proof in the most horrifying way possible. When I stepped through the front door, I smelled wax and flowers. Not the kind of flowers you give to the living, the kind you lay beside the dead. There were candles everywhere, the curtains drawn, and in the center of the room stood a coffin. A black coffin, polished and perfect, reflecting the trembling light of dozens of candles. My heart slowed, then sped up, as if my body couldn't decide which reaction was appropriate. And then I saw it. A framed photo of me, smiling, the one they took at my graduation, placed on a pedestal surrounded by roses. My breath caught. For a moment, I wondered if I had died without realizing it. Maybe this was some twisted version of purgatory, some dream I couldn't wake up from. I called out, but no one answered. The only sound was the low hum of the refrigerator in the next room, absurdly ordinary in this shrine of grief. Then I heard footsteps. My mother emerged from the kitchen in black, veil, dress, everything. Her eyes widened when she saw me, but not in joy. It was irritation, disruption, like a magician whose trick had been ruined mid-performance. "You weren't supposed to come today," she said quietly, voice trembling but not from emotion, from control. My father followed her, his tie crooked, his expression unreadable. "You shouldn't have come back," he muttered, as if it were me, the living son, who had crossed some sacred boundary. I laughed, at first. I thought it was a prank, some sick family joke. But the laughter died fast because no one else was laughing. They were serious, dead serious. And when I demanded to know what was going on, my mother said it, calmly, almost tenderly. "We wanted to see if you'd cry for us. We wanted to know if you still felt anything." It was then I realized this wasn't a prank. This was a test, a performance. A ritual built from guilt, resentment, and the desperate need for validation. My sister appeared from behind the curtain, phone in hand, recording everything. "It's for a project," she said, "social commentary. People will get it." But I didn't. I couldn't. Because in that moment, I wasn't a son. I was a subject, a symbol, a ghost trapped in someone else's experiment about love and loss. I remember staring at my own face in that framed photo, wondering when I had become more valuable as a memory than as a person. Maybe that's what family is sometimes. Not love, but ownership. The idea that they can define your worth even after they've destroyed it. My sister didn't lower her phone. She just kept recording, her eyes cold, detached, like she was filming a documentary about someone else's suffering. My mother moved closer to the coffin, gently touching its edge, as if it were sacred. "We needed to know," she whispered. "If we were gone tomorrow, would you even care?" I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell them this was insane. But the words died before they reached my lips. Because deep down, I understood what they were doing. And that terrified me more than anything. They wanted to feel important again. They wanted to be missed. And they couldn't believe it unless they saw it. That's what years of emotional warfare do. They turn love into performance, grief into theater. And I was the unwilling actor in their final act. When I finally spoke, my voice broke. "You didn't have to die to make me care," I said. But they just stared, blank, waiting for me to cry. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the coffin, my coffin. I saw my mother's expression, not grief, not remorse, just disappointment that I hadn't performed the way she expected, that I hadn't collapsed, begged, screamed, confessed. I kept thinking, what kind of love needs proof? What kind of family measures affection by how loudly you grieve? It made me question everything. Birthdays, hugs, apologies. Were any of them real? Or had it all been rehearsed like this? Around 3 a.m., I got up and walked to the living room. The coffin was still there, silent and heavy, like a secret no one wanted to admit. I opened it. Empty. Of course it was empty. But somehow, that emptiness felt truer than anything my family had ever said. Key point 2. The confrontation, when love turns into control. The next morning, I woke to the sound of laughter, light, casual, like nothing had happened. My father was making coffee, my mother was humming. The coffin was gone. It was as if the night before had been erased, rewritten, replaced with the illusion of normalcy. "You're up," my father said. "Good, breakfast ready." His voice was steady, his face calm, but there was something in his eyes, something that said, "Don't ruin this illusion." I sat at the table, numb, watching the sunlight dance across the plates. My sister scrolled through her phone, editing the footage. The sound of her tapping screen was louder than any words we could have said. Finally, I asked, "What are you planning to do with that video?" She looked up, smiled slightly, and said, "Upload it. It's art." I laughed, a hollow, broken laugh that didn't sound like me. "You call that art?" I asked. "That was my life." She didn't answer, but my mother did. "Sometimes we need to teach people how it feels," she said. "You never visit, you never call. Maybe this was the only way to make you see." That's when it hit me. They didn't regret it. They thought they were right. They believed this emotional ambush was justified. They thought pain was the only language I understood. I looked at my father, searching for any sign of doubt, any crack in his armor, but there was nothing. He just stared into his coffee, detached, complicit. Maybe that's what control looks like. Not shouting, not hitting, but silence so cold it rewrites your reality. I realized then that every family has its own mythology, stories we tell ourselves to make dysfunction bearable. Ours was built on guilt. My mother believed love was proven through suffering, that the more pain she caused, the more she cared. My father believed authority equaled affection. And my sister, she believed everything could be forgiven if it went viral. They weren't mourning me. They were mourning the idea that they couldn't control me anymore. They were mourning their loss of power, not their loss of love. I stepped closer to the coffin and touched it, my reflection glimmering off the polished surface. I saw a version of myself that didn't exist anymore. The obedient son, the one who believed love meant compliance. That version had died long before they faked his funeral. What stood in that room now was someone else, someone watching the performance and refusing to applaud. I thought of how death has always been humanity's greatest illusion. We fear it, worship it, and yet we use it to manipulate the living. Maybe that's what my family was doing, using death as a form of control, an emotional ransom note written in candlelight. As I stood there, watching them cry over the ghost they created, I understood something that chilled me. Sometimes people don't love you for who you are. They love you for what you represent to them. And once you stop playing that role, they'd rather bury you than accept your evolution. My family didn't fake my death to hurt me. They did it to keep me frozen in the version of me they could understand, the one who still needed their approval. And maybe, in some twisted way, that's what love had become, a contract signed in grief, renewed through guilt, performed until the curtain falls. Key point 3. The cost of waking up. When truth breaks the illusion, there's a moment, A very specific one. When truth doesn't set you free, it breaks you first. It's the second before the illusion shatters, when you still want to believe the lie, because it's warmer than the cold clarity waiting on the other side. That's what it felt like, standing there, surrounded by flickering candles and people I once called family, realizing that the roles we'd all played for so long had finally collapsed under their own weight. I had spent years trying to earn their approval, trying to convince them that love didn't have to be conditional, that I didn't have to die metaphorically for them to notice I was alive. But that morning, I stopped trying, because I understood. They didn't want me to change. They wanted me to stay predictable, controllable, safely tragic. The dead version of me was easier to love than the living one. When I confronted them, it wasn't with anger. It was with exhaustion, the kind that seeps into your bones after years of performing someone else's expectations. "Do you even realize what you've done?" I asked, but my voice didn't shake. My mother looked at me as if I were a ghost interrupting her dream. "You wouldn't answer our calls," she said softly. "We just wanted you to feel something again, to remember what family means." That sentence hung in the air like smoke, toxic, invisible, suffocating. Family means control. Family means guilt. That's what she really meant. And my father, silent as always, nodded, as though faking my death was a rational act of love. Yet in trying to resurrect connection, they buried authenticity instead. I wanted to scream that they'd turned love into a weapon, but something stopped me. Maybe pity, maybe clarity. I realized they weren't evil. They were broken in a way that felt almost ancient. Their entire generation was raised to equate affection with ownership, loyalty with silence, pain with proof of care. They didn't know any other way. And in a twisted sense, they believed this ritual of mourning could fix what decades of silence couldn't. It was their therapy, violent, delusional, but theirs. Yet in their attempt to reconnect, they buried authenticity instead. My sister, still filming, whispered something that made me freeze. "People are already watching. It's blowing up." My phone buzzed a few seconds later, a flood of notifications, messages, reposts. The video had gone viral. Millions of strangers were mourning me online, debating whether it was art or abuse. Hashtags like #DeadSonExperiment and #FamilyLessonGoneWrong trended worldwide. I left the house then. I don't remember what I said. Maybe nothing at all. The air outside was heavy, but it was real, uncurated, unfiltered. For the first time in years, I felt the weight of my own life, not as a narrative, not as someone else's projection, but as something undeniably mine. I realized that truth isn't about confronting others. It's about refusing to keep lying to yourself. The moment you wake up, you lose everything that was built on illusion, but what's left is something raw, painfully honest. Freedom isn't peaceful, it's violent. It destroys before it rebuilds. I walked for hours through streets that blurred into nothing. I thought about how easy it is to mistake visibility for connection, how our culture has turned emotion into spectacle. My family didn't invent the lie. They just lived it more honestly than most. They mourned a version of me that could make them look like loving parents, like tragic figures in their own morality play. That night, I watched the video again. My mother crying beside my coffin, my father staring into nothing, my sister zooming in on my photograph. It was grotesque, but there was beauty in it, not in what they did, but in what it revealed. The truth isn't always noble or inspiring. Sometimes it's ugly and necessary. They wanted me to cry for them. Instead, I cried for all of us, for how far we drifted from authenticity, for how desperate we were to feel something, even if it meant faking death to do it. And that's when I understood the real cost of waking up. Once you see the illusion for what it is, you can never go back. You can forgive, maybe, but you can never belong again. The resurrection, choosing to live after dying once. When I woke up the next morning, it felt like the world had changed. though nothing outside my window really had. The sky was still gray, the streets still silent, but I was no longer the same. There's something irreversible about dying while still alive, something that strips away the illusions you once clung to like safety blankets. My family had tried to bury me, but what they didn't understand was that in doing so, they freed me. The death they faked became the rebirth I didn't know I needed. It ended the version of me who lived for approval, who confused being needed with being loved. In the days that followed, I cut off all contact. The video still spread online, mutating into 1,000 interpretations. People called it art, abuse, manipulation, social commentary. Some defended my family, others condemned them. But none of that mattered anymore, because for the first time, I stopped caring about the narrative others built around me. I started existing outside their frame. Freedom, I learned, doesn't begin when people stop controlling you. It begins when you stop needing their permission to exist. And in that silence, where once there had been the noise of guilt and expectation, I began to feel something new: clarity.
Weeks later, I returned to that house one last time. It was empty. The candles were gone, the coffin removed, but the faint scent of wax and decay still lingered, like memory refusing to fade. On the wall, a single photograph remained, the one they had used at the fake funeral. I took it down and looked at it for a long time. The smile felt foreign, like something borrowed from a stranger. I whispered to it quietly, "You can rest now." Then I left it there, leaning against the wall, a relic of someone who no longer existed. Because in a way, that was the burial I needed, not of my body, but of my dependency. And as I stepped outside, sunlight broke through the clouds, soft and unassuming. I remember thinking that maybe resurrection isn't about being reborn into joy. Maybe it's about walking through the ruins of what once defined you and realizing you're still standing. I wasn't healed, I wasn't whole, but I was awake. And in this world, that's rarer than happiness. I thought about sending them a message, telling them I forgave them, not because they deserved it, but because I did. Forgiveness isn't the same as reconciliation. It's an act of self-preservation. It's choosing to live without dragging your ghosts behind you. Sometimes I wonder if they ever understood what they did to me. Maybe they still tell people it was all an experiment, a misunderstanding. Maybe they still believe they were right. But I've stopped needing that closure, because life, in its most honest form, isn't about being understood. It's about understanding yourself, even when the truth is unbearable. And so, if there's anything I've learned from dying once, it's this: people will bury you in their expectations, mourn you when you stop being who they want, and call it love. But love that demands your death isn't love, it's fear. The moment you stop performing, you start living. And in that moment, even if the whole world thinks you're gone, you've never been more alive.